Tonight, there are urgent questions surrounding some of the most vulnerable people living in Washington, D.C. during Trump's takeover of the nation's capital. Authorities were seen clearing out homeless encampments across the Capitol this week. It's all part of Trump's stated goal of cracking down on crime and cleaning up the city. They've called it beautification, despite the fact that the D.C. Metropolitan Police say violent crime is down 26% in the Capitol right now. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt gave us a clue where people could end up.
Homeless individuals will be given the option to leave their encampment, to be taken to a homeless shelter, to be offered addiction or mental health services, and if they refuse, they will be susceptible to fines or to jail time. While we are targeting criminals and trying to remove criminals off of the streets, we also want to make DC safe and beautiful, and that involves removing mentally disturbed individuals in homeless encampments as well. So we will be using these regulations and code that already exists to clean up our streets.
Susceptible to fines or jail time. Joining us now is Donald Whitehead, Executive Director of the National Coalition for the Homeless. Donald, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're so grateful to have your voice at the table. I want to start with you just helping Americans understand who maybe don't have much familiarity with what these processes actually mean.
Sure.
What does it mean for someone to experience one of these sweeps? What is the impact?
The impact, it's all negative. There are no positives to these kinds of sweeps. I actually call them raids because they're more like raids than they are sweeps, and you shouldn't be talking about sweeping people. So there are no positive impacts for this kind of thing to happen. When people are moved to other locations, they lose contact with social service agencies. Study after study has said that their mental and physical health can get worse in these conditions. It is just really terrible for people for a number of reasons, those that I mentioned, and also just people are terrified right now. If you were living in the place that you had to live because there's not enough housing in this country. That is the main reason that people are homeless, and someone takes away your temporary shelter with a bulldozer. And we know that a couple of times people have died. You know, the bulldozer comes in and scoops people up, and sometimes they don't take the time to even know that someone's still in the encampment.
For a lot of viewers, they may not necessarily understand the transition from what it is to be in an encampment, that is a space that you have made work for you for a particular amount of time, to being forced to go to an actual shelter. Can you explain for our audience what the actual challenges of being in that situation may be so that people understand the challenges around the transition and why? Because there are folks who will say, well, it's a shelter. I mean, it's better than being out on the street. There are services that are going to be provided to you. They said that you would get the option of mental health treatment and everything else. Why is it for people who may not understand that that may not necessarily be a viable option or an attractive option to someone who's unhoused?
Well, it's a great question. And the real underlying issue is nowhere in this country is there enough shelter in the first place. So when they raid your encampment, there's absolutely no guarantee that you'll go to a shelter. Typically what happens is people move from one unsheltered location to another. So you haven't solved anything. So by criminalizing people, fining, jailing, giving people tickets, you actually exacerbate homelessness. You make it worse. Yeah. Now people have a criminal record to deal with, and their opportunity to get in housing is that much more of a burden. The opportunity to get a job is that much more of a burden. And again, we don't have enough shelter in any city in the United States right now.
I know. Sorry, go ahead, sorry.
No, that's fine.
And now I was going to pick up on that point and ask you, because I know there's no silver bullet to the problem of homelessness. How do you begin to structurally address the issues that you're talking about, which include everything from proper health care to those who need it, and to try to create more housing, affordable housing, in the immediate short term when that is a long-term planning or urban planning policy issue?
Well, we have to get our elected officials to invest in the solutions to homelessness that meet the scale of the issue. So the other thing we have to do is we have to go upstream. We have to make sure people aren't becoming homeless in the first place. So in this country, this will probably shock you, 19,000 people become homeless for the first time. So 19,000 people enter a system, which does pretty well once people enter the system. So, and in DC, homelessness had been reduced by 9% over year. So the services on the ground, the professionals that do this work are doing a fantastic job. What we need now is the cooperation of our elected officials. So again, we've never funded homeless services to the level of need. And in fact, this president's budget would zero out most of the most effective evidence-based practices that deal with homelessness. He wanted to put time limits on subsidized housing. Only a quarter of the people who should get subsidized housing and are eligible for it actually receive it. So we have a major housing problem in this country. We have 7 million less units than we have a need for those units in this country.
I got to ask you, though, before we go, because I know you wrote about this in your book and the race component in this. There have been a lot of, historical patterns that are reemerging in the way, in recent events, in the way that the Trump administration is going about this. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on how you see the connection between historical events in Black families and what is happening now again in D.C.
We have a very long history in this country of abusing, exploiting people who are unhoused or housing insecure or who are living with mental illnesses. And it's even worse for people of color. And actually, we know that Black people are overrepresented among the homeless population in the United States. So when you see these sweeps, it's often Black Americans, Latino Americans, people really of all backgrounds, but minorities are overrepresented who are deeply impacted by this. And I wrote my book, Madness, about the history of the treatment of people in these positions because going back, more than 100 years, our leadership in our country, including at the facility that I write about in the book, which is a place called Crownsville, which is very close to Washington, D.C., and people from D.C. ended up at this asylum, which forced people who were unhoused to build it for free. Forced people who were unhoused to do free labor that then offset the cost of their own care. Basically robbing and exploiting people who are in this position. And so when you hear politicians talk about wanting to push people out to unknown locations or put them into prisons and jails, there is a long history of that I think is really important. And so many people have personal connections to this. I think often people think this is something that's so far from me, but many Americans are one crisis away from themselves experiencing housing insecurity. And many Americans, like myself, have family members who have suffered with mental health challenges, suffered with housing instability, and come face to face with police. And I can tell you that is not an interaction that leads to good care, to good outcomes. And there are evidence-based solutions, Donald, I know you know this, that people have been screaming for years we could invest in. And so I wanted to take this sort of historical look at this in Madness because I think it helps people understand how did we get here? And why are we seeing this push from our federal government right now? I think it's really important for people to take that long view.
And just to underscore that, 85% of the population of people experiencing homelessness in D.C. are people of color. People of color are 3 to 4 times more likely to become homeless. And the issue that we have to deal with that hasn't ever left us since the beginning of this country is structural racism. So that's another big component of this. And I would also say 2 things really important. One is that criminalization does not solve homelessness. You can't threaten somebody into having enough money to pay their rent. If you criminalize people, homelessness gets worse. But people in communities around this country have to push back against that. We need our faith leaders, we need our civil rights leaders to talk about this more.
I think the intersection of race, criminalization, and an attitude of not in my backyard have really coalesced in this moment to create a crisis that needs to be addressed even further. Donald Whitehead, thank you so much for being here and having this very important conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.